You say you believe in what you sell. You tell yourself you're confident. You've practiced the pitch, memorized the features, rehearsed the objection handles. But when the deal slips away, when the buyer's eyes drift, when their body shifts back, when you feel that quiet hesitation creep into your own voice mid-sentence, something deeper reveals itself. And the question lands in your chest like a weight. Do I really believe this? Because here's what nobody tells you when you get into sales. The buyer doesn't hear your pitch. They feel your certainty. And the moment your belief cracks, even slightly, even silently, the sale is already lost. If that's the conversation you've been having with yourself lately, don't go anywhere. This is the episode for you.
Welcome to the Sales Evolution Lab, exploring the science of selling, from past wisdom to future innovation.
Welcome, my friends. I'm Kyle Mackie, and this right here is the very first episode of the Sales Evolution Lab podcast. So let me take a moment to tell you what we're building together, and more importantly, why it matters for you. This podcast exists for one reason: to help you evolve. Not just to sell more, not just to close harder, but to become the kind of salesperson who doesn't need tricks because you've done the deeper work, the psychology, the self-awareness, the emotional intelligence that turns every conversation into connection. That's what separates the top from everyone else. And that's what we're going to explore together. Every episode, we're going to unpack the wisdom from the greatest books ever written on sales and persuasion. We'll take the ideas that have helped salespeople thrive for decades, the timeless principles that still work when everything else changes, and we'll bring them into the present. We'll break them down. We'll test them against real experience, and we'll give you something you can actually use. Not theory, not fluff, but tools that make a difference the next time you're face-to-face with a buyer. But here's where it gets exciting. We're not stopping at the past. As this podcast grows, we're going to interview experts, sales leaders, coaches, people crushing it in niches I've never touched. We're going to explore how AI is changing the game, what tools are emerging, what's actually useful, and what's just hype. And we're going to look ahead, because the salespeople who evolve for the future will thrive. And the ones who don't, they'll wonder what happened. So if you're ready to evolve for the future of selling, subscribe right now so you'll never miss an episode. And stay with me on this one, because we're starting with one of the most important books ever written on psychology of sales. Let me ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly, even if it's uncomfortable. Have you ever stood across from a buyer, someone you knew needed what you were offering, and felt the words coming out of your mouth land flat? You said all the right things. You hit every talking point. Your pitch was solid, but somewhere in the middle of it, you could feel it slipping away. Not because they didn't want it, not because the price was wrong, not because the competition was better, but because something in you hesitated. Maybe you questioned the product. Maybe you questioned the timing. Maybe, just for a second, you questioned yourself. And in that moment, something shifted. They could feel it. You could feel it. And by the time you got to the close, the trust was already gone. I know that feeling. I've lived it. And I want to take you back to a moment that taught me something I'll never forget. I was in my early 20s, working at Movati Athletics, selling personal training. By my second year, I was consistently one of the best in the company, sometimes the best, and I'd gotten used to winning. When I sat down across from someone in a consultation, I didn't hope they'd buy. I knew they would. Not in an arrogant way, in a calm way, a certain way. I believed, really believed, that what I was offering could change their life. And because I believed it, they felt it. The words flowed. The connection was natural. The close wasn't a battle. It was an invitation. And most of the time, they said yes. But one afternoon, something shifted. I remember the setup clearly. Woman in her mid 40s, professional, clearly had disposable income. She'd come in asking about training packages. She was the perfect prospect. I sat down with her in the consultation room, same way I'd done hundreds of times before. Started walking her through the pitch, asking questions, building rapport. And then, right in the middle of it, I felt something I hadn't expected. Doubt. Not about her, about us. See, at that point, our best trainers were fully booked. The newer trainers coming in didn't have the same fire, the same skill, the same ability to actually deliver results. And I knew somewhere deep down that if this woman signed up, she might not get the experience I was promising. I kept talking, I kept smiling, but inside, the certainty was cracking. And here's the thing about doubt. You can't hide it. You think you can. You think you're saying all the right words, holding the right posture, projecting confidence. But doubt leaks. It leaks through your tone, through your pacing, through the micro expressions on your face that don't even know you're making. And the person across from you, they don't know what changed. They can't point to it, but they feel it. Something's off, and they pull back. That's exactly what happened. Halfway through the conversation, her energy shifted. She went from leaning in to leaning back, from engaged to guarded. And by the end, she gave me the line I'd heard 1,000 times from other salespeople's prospects, but barely from my own. I need to think about it. I smiled, said all the polite things, told her I'd follow up. But inside, I knew the truth. I'd lost the sale before I ever asked for it. Not because my pitch was wrong, because my belief had cracked. And she'd felt every fracture. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. What happened? I'd done everything right. The technique was the same. The words were the same. What changed? And then it hit me. I changed. My conviction changed. And when my conviction changed, so did hers. That's when I started understanding something Brian Tracy would later put into words better than I ever could. He calls it the inner game of selling. And it's the foundation of everything we're going to talk about today. Tracy spent decades, literally decades, studying what separates top performers from everyone else. And what he found wasn't about technique. It wasn't about scripts. It wasn't about handling objections or trial closes or tie downs. It was about what's happening inside. The beliefs, the self-image, the conviction that runs silently underneath every word you say. He puts it simply, the most important sale you ever make is the one you make to yourself. Hear that again. The most important sale you ever make is the one you make to yourself. Before you can transfer belief to a customer, you have to own it. Before you can create certainty in someone else, you have to feel it in your bones. And if that inner sale hasn't happened, if you're walking into conversations hoping instead of knowing, the customer will always feel the gap. Here's the thing about conviction. It's not something you can fake for long. You might get through a conversation, maybe a week, maybe even a month, if you're really good at performing. But eventually, the mask slips, the truth surfaces, and the people across from you, they're not just listening to your words. They're reading your energy. They're sensing your certainty or your doubt. They're deciding at a level below conscious thought whether they trust you. And when your belief and your message aren't aligned, they feel the gap. Even if they can't explain it, even if they can't point to a single word that was wrong, they feel it and they pull away. That's why today's episode matters so much. We're not going to talk about closing tricks. We're not going to rehearse objection scripts. We're going to talk about the foundation that makes everything else work, the inner game, the psychology of selling. We're going to explore how your self-concept, the way you see yourself, directly controls your income. We're going to unpack how fear and rejection are quietly running your behavior in ways you don't even notice. We're going to look at how the top performers think and why that thinking produces results that seem almost unfair. And we're going to give you the tools to rebuild belief from the inside out. So when you speak, the market feels certainty again. By the end of this episode, you'll understand exactly why your results have been stuck. And more importantly, you'll know what to change. Because here's the truth. You don't need a better pitch. You need a stronger foundation. You don't need to be louder. You need to be truer. The salesperson who wins isn't the one with the flashiest technique. It's the one whose conviction can't be shaken. So, take a breath. Settle in. This is the work, and it starts right now. And that leads us to the question that changes everything. If belief is the foundation, if conviction is what the customer actually feels, then where does that belief come from? And why does it crack? That's what we need to understand. Because until you see how the inner game actually works, you'll keep treating symptoms instead of causes. You'll keep chasing techniques when the real problem is deeper. So let's go there. Let's talk about the master program that's running your entire sales career, whether you know it or not. Every salesperson talks about confidence. You're told to be confident, sound confident, walk into the room like we belong there. But here's what most people get completely wrong. Confidence isn't volume. It's not a louder voice. It's not a firmer handshake. It's not standing up straighter or making more eye contact or projecting energy into a room. Those are symptoms. Real confidence is something much deeper. It's congruence. It's the alignment between what you're saying, what you're doing, and what you actually believe. When those three things line up, when your words and your actions and your inner conviction are all pointing in the same direction, something almost magical happens. The words flow without effort. The energy in the room shifts. The buyer feels it without knowing why. They lean in, they trust, they buy. But when those three things are out of alignment, when your words say one thing and your gut says another, everything falls apart. The prospect might not be able to explain it. They might not point to a single thing you said wrong, but they feel something's off. And that feeling is enough to kill the sale. Brian Tracy calls selling a transfer of enthusiasm. I love that line. But here's the part most people miss. You can't transfer what you don't have. If your enthusiasm is manufactured, if your confidence is a mask you're putting on, the transfer never happens. You're trying to pour from an empty cup, and the buyer feels the emptiness. They mirror your energy. If you're certain, they feel certain. If you're hesitant, they hesitate. If you're excited, they get excited. If you're going through the motions, they go through the motions of saying no. Think about the times you were unstoppable, the deals that just clicked, the conversations where everything flowed. You probably weren't thinking about objection handling. You weren't rehearsing your closes in your head. You weren't worrying about what to say next. You were just there, in the moment, relaxed, certain, genuinely excited about what you were offering. That's belief alignment. That's the inner game working for you. And when it's there, selling doesn't feel like selling. It feels like helping. It feels like connecting. It feels like offering something valuable to someone who needs it. Now think about the opposite, the weeks where everything felt hard, when every conversation seemed uphill, when you caught yourself editing mid sentence, second guessing your words, anticipating objections before they even came up. That's what happens when belief cracks. You start compensating, talking faster, pushing harder, throwing in extra features, extra benefits, extra urgency, hoping volume can cover uncertainty. But it never works because the buyer's nervous system reads yours before their conscious brain catches up. They feel the tension, they feel the doubt, and they pull away. Not because your product is wrong, because something in you is unresolved. This is why Tracy says something that changed the way I think about performance. He calls your self-concept the master program of your subconscious mind. Think about that. Your self-concept, the bundle of beliefs you hold about yourself, your abilities, your worth, isn't just something you think. It's the operating system running your entire life. Like the software on a computer. It runs in the background silently, constantly, and it controls everything, your thoughts, your feelings, your actions, your results. Here's the insight that hit me like a punch in the chest the first time I really understood it. You always perform on the outside in a way that's consistent with your self-concept on the inside. Always. Not sometimes, not usually, always. If you see yourself as a $50,000 a year salesperson, you'll behave like one. You'll think like one. You'll make decisions like one. And you'll produce results that match. If you see yourself as someone who earns six figures, if that's the picture you hold of yourself, if that's who you believe you are, you'll act like that person too. You'll take different actions. You'll hold different conversations. You'll carry yourself differently. Your income doesn't determine your self-concept. Your self-concept determines your income. Tracy tells this story that stayed with me. A salesperson set a goal at the beginning of the year. Let's say it was like $50,000. He has a great year, better than expected. Deals are closing, momentum is building. But by September, he's already hit his goal, $50,000. Done, 3 months early. And then something strange happens. The sales, they stop. Not because the market changed, not because leads dried up, not because competition got fiercer. He just stopped selling. He goes through the motions, shows up to work, makes some calls, but nothing closes. He can't seem to get motivated, can't seem to find the energy. And for the rest of the year, October, November, December, he coasts, barely scraping by, wondering what happened. Then January 1st arrives, new year, clean slate. And suddenly, like a switch, he's selling again. Same product, same market, same skills. But now that the calendar has reset, his subconscious gives him permission to perform again. That's the income thermostat. Tracy uses this metaphor, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Think about how a thermostat works in your house. You set it to 72 degrees. When the room gets too hot, the cooling kicks in. When it gets too cold, the heat turns on. The system is designed to maintain equilibrium, to keep you exactly where you set it. Your self-concept works the same way. You have a preset temperature, an income range where you feel psychologically comfortable. Go more than 10% above it, and something strange happens. You start pulling back. Maybe you spend more than you should. Maybe you take your foot off the gas. Maybe you find yourself procrastinating in ways you can't explain. You start sabotaging, not consciously, not deliberately, but subtly. Your subconscious mind is regulating you back to where it thinks you belong. Fall more than 10%, And the opposite happens. You scramble, work harder, push through discomfort, stay late, make extra calls because you feel the urgency to get back to normal. But here's the problem. Unless you deliberately reset the thermostat, unless you change the internal picture, you'll spend your whole career bouncing around the same range. You'll wonder why the breakthroughs never come. And the answer won't be in your technique, it'll be in your self image. Tracy tells another story that's even more extreme. A young man from a poor background gets a sale job selling satellite dishes to farmers. This is in a rural area, and the harvest that year was exceptional. Farmers have money. They're buying. And this young guy who's never had anything, who grew up scraping by, suddenly starts making money. Not just good money, life-changing money. More than he ever dreamed of. Week after week, the commissions pile up. And then something happens. He goes home one night, walks into his small apartment, turns off all the lights, crawls under the covers, and lies there in the dark with his heart pounding. Not from excitement, from terror. The success was too much. It was too far outside who he believed he was. His self-concept said he was a poor kid from a tough background. And this new reality, this version of himself making thousands of dollars a week, didn't fit the picture. So his mind shut down, literally, physically. He couldn't handle it. Now you might think that's extreme. That wouldn't happen to me. And maybe you're right. Maybe you wouldn't crawl under the covers. But it shows up in subtler ways all the time. The salesperson who has an amazing quarter and then goes quiet. The rep who finally lands the big account and immediately starts second guessing. The closer who hits a personal record and then can't seem to find rhythm for months. It's not that they forgot how to sell. It's that their self-concept hasn't caught up with their results. And until it does, they'll keep drifting back to baseline. I've felt this in my own life. When I moved to New Zealand to open my fundraising company, the first few months were a grind. Building a team from scratch, learning a new market, figuring out what worked and what didn't. Long days, uncertain results, constant adjustments. But once things start clicking, once the team found its rhythm and the numbers started climbing, something unexpected happened. The money came faster than I was ready for. And I noticed myself doing things that didn't make sense. Taking days off when I didn't need to, avoiding looking at the accounts, finding reasons to slow down. It wasn't burnout. It wasn't exhaustion. It was my thermostat kicking in. My internal programming said, this is too much. This isn't who you are. And I started unconsciously pulling back. But once I realized it, once I saw the pattern for what it was, everything changed. I started doing the work to reset the thermostat, visualizing what it would look like to operate at a higher level, repeating affirmations that felt uncomfortable at first, writing out the identity of someone who belongs at this income, not hoping for it, claiming it, and slowly my self-concept expanded. The discomfort faded. The results followed, not because the market changed, because I changed. Here's what Tracy says. You can never earn more on the outside than you believe on the inside. Hear that again. You can never earn more on the outside than you believe on the inside. If your internal picture says you're a $50,000 salesperson, you can learn every technique in the world, every close, every handle, every script, and your results will stay anchored to that belief. The skills might get you to a temporary spike, but you'll drift back, always, because the master program is still running, and the master program always wins. The only way to break through permanently is to change the internal picture first. to convince yourself at the deepest level that you are the kind of person who earns more, who performs at a higher level, who belongs in the top percent. And then your actions will catch up. Your behaviors will follow. Your results will align. Not because you're forcing it, because it's who you've become. So here's the big idea that frames everything we're going to cover today. The quality of your results will never exceed the quality of your self-belief about what you sell, about who you are while selling it, about what you deserve to earn, about what's possible for your life. Everything we cover from here, every lesson, every story, every tool will come back to that single truth. Because once you understand that belief alignment is the foundation, the rest of sales becomes predictable. Not easy, predictable. Confidence stops being a mood you wait for. It becomes a muscle you train. And the people who master the inner game don't just make more money. They move through the world differently. You can hear it in their voice. You can feel it in their presence. They walk into a room and the energy changes. Not because they're loud, because they're certain. That's what we're going to build today, certainty. Not the fake kind that depends on a good month, the deep kind that anchors you no matter what happens outside. And that leads us to the first real shift. Because understanding that self-concept controls performance is one thing, but how do you actually change it? Where do you start? The answer begins with something most salespeople completely ignore. The sale that happens before any sale. The invisible sale. The one you make or fail to make to yourself every single day. Let's go there. So, here's a truth nobody wants to hear. Most salespeople are fighting the wrong battle. They're focused on convincing the customer, on objection handling, on overcoming resistance, on finding the right words at the right moment to push the deal across the finish line. But the first sale, the most important sale, isn't out there. It's in here. Tracy says it as plainly as anyone ever has. The most important sale you ever make is the one you make to yourself. Before you can transfer belief to a customer, you have to own it. Before you can create certainty in someone else, you have to feel it in your bones. Before you can convince anyone to trust you, you have to trust yourself. That's the invisible sale. And it happens or fails to happen every single day, whether you realize it or not. Let me take you back to a morning I still think about. I was working in fundraising, this was years ago in Canada, shopping center campaigns for child sponsorship. You know how it works. You set up your display, people walk by, and your job is to stop them, connect with them, move them to give. It's pure face-to-face. No hiding, no email buffer, just you and a stranger, and about 3 seconds to earn their attention. On paper, I knew how to do it. I'd done it hundreds of times, thousands of times. But that morning, I woke up feeling off. I don't even remember why. Maybe I didn't sleep well. Maybe I was tired of rejection. Maybe something in me had started to question whether any of this even mattered. I got to the mall early, set up my display, put on my lanyard, and as people started walking by, I felt this weight in my chest. Not nerves, something heavier. Doubt. I approached the first person. I smiled, said my opening line, and before they even responded, before they had a chance to say yes or no, I could feel myself bracing for the rejection, expecting it, almost inviting it. And sure enough, they brushed past without making eye contact. The next person, same thing. And the next. By noon, I had barely made a connection. People weren't just saying no, they weren't even stopping. It was like I was invisible. And I started telling myself stories. It's a slow day. Wrong demographic. People are distracted. The holidays. Everyone's in a rush. But deep down, I knew the problem wasn't them. The problem was me. I hadn't made the invisible sale. I hadn't really convinced myself that what I was doing mattered. And if I didn't believe it, how could they? So that afternoon, I took a break, walked outside the mall, found a bench away from the noise, and I did something that felt almost embarrassing at that time. I closed my eyes and asked myself a question, not out loud, but deliberately, intentionally. Why am I here? Not the paycheck answer, not the career answer, not the surface level because I need to earn a living answer. The real answer, the one underneath. And as I really sat there without distraction, it started to come back. It was the kids, the communities we were helping, the families who would never meet the donor, but whose lives would be different because someone stopped for 30 seconds in a shopping center. I started picturing it. A child getting clean water, a mother watching her kid go to school for the first time, a village with a well where there used to be nothing. Real people, real change, not statistics, not talking points, actual human beings whose lives were better because of what we were doing. And as I held that picture in my mind, as I let myself feel it instead of just think it, something shifted. The weight lifted. Not because anything external changed, but because I had reconnected with why this mattered. I had made the invisible sale. I walked back into that mall, a different person. Same script, same smile, same opening line. But now, when I approached someone, I wasn't hoping they would believe me. I already believed, and they could feel it. The first person I talked to, a woman walking quickly, clearly in a hurry, stopped. She listened. She asked questions. She signed up. Then the next, and the next. By the end of that day, I had one of the best shifts I'd ever had. Not because the market changed, because I changed. Tracy talks about something he calls the law of cause and effect. It's simple, but it's profound. Success isn't an accident. Failure isn't an accident. They both have causes. And if you do what successful people do consistently and repeatably, you will eventually get the same results. But here's the catch. Doing it isn't just about action. It starts with belief. You have to cause your own conviction before you can cause the sale. The invisible sale always comes first. Think about the best salesperson you know. The one who seems to close without effort, who walks into conversations and somehow people just trust them. What do they have that everyone else doesn't? It's not a magic strip. It's not some secret technique. It's the invisible sale. They've already convinced themselves. So when they speak, there's no gap. There's no hesitation. There's no underlying uncertainty for the buyer to sense. Just alignment, just conviction, just truth. Here's why this matters so much. You can teach someone a script. You can drill objection handles until they're automatic. You can practice closes and tie downs and trial closes until they're muscle memory. But you cannot teach conviction. You cannot script belief. You can only cultivate it. And cultivation starts with intention, with reconnecting every single day to why this work matters. I've seen this pattern repeat more times than I can count. A rep is struggling. Numbers are down. They're working hard, maybe harder than ever, but nothing's landing. And when I sit down with them and ask, do you believe in what you're selling? Really believe, not just intellectually agree. There's a pause, a hesitation. And that hesitation is the answer. They've lost the invisible sale. Maybe they're frustrated with the company. Maybe they've heard too many complaints. Maybe they started to question whether the product actually delivers. Whatever the reason, the conviction is gone. And until it comes back, no technique will save them. So here's the reflection I want you to sit with. When was the last time you really made the invisible sale? Not just told yourself you believed, not just showed up and hoped for the best, but actually felt it. Felt the weight of why you're doing this. Felt the certainty that what your offer genuinely helps people. Felt in your body, not just your mind, that this matters. If you can't remember the last time you felt that, no wonder the numbers are stuck. The technique is there, but the foundation is cracked. So here's what I want you to do. Not tomorrow, not next week, today, before your next call, your next meeting, your next pitch. Take 60 seconds. 60 seconds, that's all. Close your eyes. Take a breath. And ask yourself that question. Why does this matter? Not to the company, not to your boss, to you. Why does this work matter? Who does it help? What changes because of what you do? Find the answer. Hold it in your mind. Feel it in your body. And then, and only then, go make the call. I promise you, they'll feel the difference because you will. But here's what I learned. The invisible sale isn't something you make once. It's something you have to keep making because there's a force working against you, a psychological regulator that's constantly trying to pull you back to where you started. And until you understand how it works, you'll keep hitting that same ceiling. That's the income thermostat, and it explains more about your career than you probably want to admit. So let's go deeper. We talked earlier about the thermostat, that internal set point that regulates your income. Most people hear that and think, okay, cool metaphor. I get it. But understanding the concept isn't the same as feeling it. And I want to show you what actually happens, the real, uncomfortable, sometimes terrifying experience when you start to break through your internal ceiling. Because here's what nobody warns you about. Growth doesn't feel like growth, not at first. It feels like something wrong. Think about the last time you had an unexpected stretch of success. Maybe you closed 3 deals in a week when you normally close 1. Maybe you landed a client way bigger than your usual. Maybe your numbers jumped and suddenly you were outperforming people who'd been ahead of you for years. What did you feel? If you're honest, it probably wasn't pure excitement. There was something else mixed in, a tightness in your chest, a voice in your head saying, this can't last, a strange urge to slow down, even when everything was working. That's the thermostat, not as a concept, as an experience. I knew a guy back in Australia who sold consulting packages to small businesses, high ticket stuff, $5,000, $10,000 per engagement. He'd been grinding for years at the lower end, selling smaller packages, building his reputation, paying his dues. His comfort zone was around $2,000 a deal. That's what felt normal. That's what felt like him. Then one month, something shifted. He landed 3 big clients in a row. Not his usual deals. These were $15,000 contracts each. More money in 30 days than he'd made in the previous 6 months combined. And instead of celebrating, instead of feeling like he finally made it, he started unraveling. He told me later what it was like. He couldn't sleep, kept waking up at 3 a.m. with his heart racing. Not from excitement, from dread. He was convinced the clients would figure out he wasn't worth the money. Every email he sent, he second-guessed. Every call, he overthought. He started imagining worst-case scenarios. What if they ask for a refund? What if they tell other people I'm a fraud? What if this whole thing falls apart? The success wasn't making him confident, it was making him terrified. And then he did something that still blows my mind. He refunded one of the clients, gave the money back, $15,000, just handed it over and walked away from the contract. When I asked him why, he said, I just wasn't ready for that level yet. But that wasn't the real reason. The real reason was his thermostat. His self-concept said he was a $2,000 guy. And when reality jumped too far past that picture, his subconscious couldn't handle the gap. So it found a way to close it. He literally paid money to return to his comfort zone. Now, you might hear that and think, I'd never do that. And maybe you wouldn't refund a client. But the mechanisms show up in subtler ways all the time. And once you know what to look for, you'll start seeing it everywhere. In yourself, in your teammates, in people you've watched flame out after a hot streak. Here's what the gap actually feels like. When you start operating above that internal set point, your brain interprets it as danger, not consciously, subconsciously. The unfamiliar registers as unsafe, even if the unfamiliar is success, even if the unfamiliar is exactly what you've been working towards. Your nervous system doesn't care about your goals. It cares about keeping you alive, and alive means familiar. So it starts sending signals. The first signal is usually physical: tightness in your chest, shallow breathing, trouble sleeping, a low-grade anxiety that doesn't seem connected to anything specific. You might wake up at 2 a.m. with your mind racing, not about problems, about possibilities, about what happens if this keeps going, about what it means if you actually become the person who earns this much. The second signal is mental. Imposter syndrome kicks in hard. You start waiting to be found out. Every compliment feels suspicious. Every win feels like a fluke. You tell yourself it's just a good month, just lucky timing, just the right lead falling into place. You refuse to own the success because owning it would mean updating your identity. And your subconscious doesn't want to update. It wants to stay exactly where it is. The third signal is behavioral. This is where the self-sabotage gets creative. You start making decisions that don't make sense, spending money you shouldn't spend, picking fights with people who support you, missing followed up you'd normally never miss, taking days off when you're on a roll, finding reasons to slow down right when you should be accelerating. And the crazy thing is, you'll have perfectly logical explanations for all of it. I was tired. I needed a break. Something came up. But underneath those explanations, the thermostat is doing its job, cooling you back down, returning you to baseline, keeping you safe in the familiar. I felt this myself. After a particularly strong stretch in New Zealand, I noticed something strange happening. The numbers were good. The team was performing. Everything I'd been building was finally clicking. And instead of feeling proud, I felt exposed. Like I'd accidentally wandered into a room I didn't belong in. Like someone was going to tap me on the shoulder and say, hey, there's been a mistake. You're not supposed to be here. I started doing little things like sabotaging myself. Not big dramatic things, subtle things. Taking an extra day off here and there. Avoiding the accounts, not following up on opportunities I would have jumped on 6 months earlier. I wasn't burned out. I wasn't tired. I was uncomfortable with the success. And my subconscious was trying to fix that discomfort the only way it knew how, by bringing me back down. So what do you do about it? How do you break through when your own mind is working against you? The answer isn't to fight it. You can't willpower your way past your subconscious. It's too fast. It's too automatic, too deeply wired. The answer is to reprogram it gradually, deliberately, systematically. Here's what actually works. First, you have to expect the discomfort. This is huge. Most people hit success, feel terrible, and assume something's wrong. They think, If this were right for me, I'd feel good about it. But that's not how growth works. Growth feels uncomfortable by definition. If it felt comfortable, it wouldn't be growth. It would be maintenance. So when you start exceeding your thermostat, your anxiety kicks in. When you can't sleep, when you feel like a fraud, when part of what you want to slows down, recognize it for what it is. It's not a sign that something's wrong. It's a sign that something's working. Your discomfort is evidence of expansion. Expect it. Welcome it. Keep moving anyway. Second, you have to normalize the new level before you live it. This is where visualization becomes tactical, not mystical. Your subconscious can't tell the difference between a real memory and a vividly imaged experience. This isn't woo-woo. This is neuroscience. When you imagine something with enough detail, enough sensory richness, enough emotional engagement, your brain processes it in the same way it processes actual experience. So you can use this to your advantage. Before you hit the new level in reality, you rehearse it in your mind over and over until it stops feeling foreign, until it starts feeling like something you've already done. Here's the practice. Every morning, before you start your day, close your eyes for 5 minutes. Picture yourself operating at the next level, not the fantasy level, not the wouldn't it be nice level, the next realistic step. See yourself closing the bigger deals, handling the larger accounts, earning the higher income. But don't just see it, feel it. What does it feel like in your body when you are that person? How do you carry yourself? How do you speak? How do you respond when someone asks what you do? Make it vivid, make it specific, make it real enough that your nervous system starts to accept it as familiar. Third, you have to close the gap between who you are and who you're becoming, one day at a time. This is where affirmation comes in, but not the kind where you stand in front of a mirror and shout things you don't believe. That doesn't work. Your subconscious rejects statements that are too far from your current reality. If you're making 40,000 and you tell yourself, I'm a millionaire, your brain just rolls its eyes. The affirmation has to be close enough to be believable, stretching but not breaking. So instead of I'm a millionaire, you say, I'm the kind of person who earns the next level amount. This is who I'm becoming. Instead of I am the best salesperson in the world, you say, I am someone who gets better every single day. My skills are growing. My confidence is building. The affirmation has to feel like a slight reach, like you're stretching towards something real, not lying to yourself, growing into yourself. Fourth, and this is one of the step most people skip. You have to act before you feel ready. The thermostat resets through action, not just thought. You can visualize all day. You can affirm until you're blue in the face. But if you don't start behaving like the person you're becoming, nothing changes. So you have to ask yourself, what would the next level version of me do today? Would they make the call I've been avoiding? Would they follow up on that lead I've been sitting on? Would they show up earlier, stay later, prepare more thoroughly? And then you do it. Not because you feel ready, because action creates feeling, not the other way around. You act your way into a new identity. You behave your way into a new thermostat setting. The confidence comes after. Here's what I want you to take from this. The thermostat is real. You've felt it. You've probably sabotaged yourself because of it, maybe without even knowing. But it's not permanent. It's not fixed. It's just a setting. And settings can be changed, not overnight, not by accident, but deliberately through awareness, through visualization, through affirmation, through action. You can expand who you believe you are. And when you do, your results will follow. Not because the market changed, because you did. But here's what nobody tells you. Even when you start resetting the thermostat, even when you're doing the work to expand your identity, there's another force working against you. Something that limits how many calls you make, how many conversations you have, how many opportunities you even give yourself. It's running in the background of every sales day you've ever worked. And until you address it, no amount of visualization or affirmation will matter because you won't take enough action for any of it to pay off. I'm talking about the two fears, the fear of rejection and the fear of failure. Let's talk about what they're really doing to your career and how to finally release them. So let me ask you something personal, and I want you to answer honestly. How much time do you actually spend selling each day? Not working, not responding to emails, not sitting in meetings, not doing admin, not preparing, actually selling face to face or voice to voice with a prospect who could say yes. If you're honest, the number might be smaller than you want to admit. Tracy cites research that should shake every salesperson awake. The average salesperson across industries, across experience levels, works about 90 minutes a day of actual selling time. 90 minutes out of an 8-hour day, sometimes a 10-hour day. 90 minutes of real selling. And here's the uncomfortable question. What's filling the rest of that time? For most people, the answer is fear. Not the obvious kind, the fear that makes you freeze in your tracks or run out of the room. It's quieter than that, more subtle, more insidious. It shows up as just checking a few emails first, as I'll make the call after lunch, as reading the news before you start, as shuffling papers, as one more cup of coffee, as chatting with coworkers about how tough the market is. All of it, every single delay, is a fear in disguise. Tracy calls this a subconscious brake. It's the force that holds you back without you even realizing it's there. And at the root of it are two fears, the fear of rejection and the fear of failure. Let's talk about the rejection first. The fear of rejection goes deep, deeper than sales, deeper than your career. It starts in childhood. When we learned through experience, through observation, that being criticized or excluded hurt, that being rejected meant something was wrong with us. And somewhere along the way, our brain started treating rejection as a threat, not just emotionally uncomfortable, actually dangerous, like a physical attack. In sales, that means every time you pick up the phone, every time you knock on a door, every time you ask for the close, your brain is running a calculation. If I do this, I might be rejected. They might say no. They might be rude. They might make me feel small. And if that fear is strong enough, if the anticipated pain is high enough, your subconscious finds ways to protect you. Delay, procrastination, excuses, busy work, anything to avoid the moment when you have to put yourself on the line and risk hearing no. You tell yourself you're being strategic. You tell yourself you're preparing, but really you're hiding. I remember a stretch early in my fundraising career when this hits me hard. I was working shopping centers in Canada, holiday season, foot traffic was through the roof. Thousands of people walking by every hour, and I was struggling. I'd stand in my spot, watch people walk by, find myself hesitating to approach. Not every time, but just often enough to cost me. I'd wait for the right person. I'd tell myself the last rejection rattled me too much. I'd take a bathroom break I didn't even really need. I'd reorganize my material, check my phone, find reasons, small, subtle, completely reasonable reasons to delay. And by the end of the day, my numbers were average, even though the opportunity was everywhere, even though people were literally streaming past me. What I didn't realize at the time was that the fear of rejection was running the show, not my strategy, not the market, my subconscious brake. Tracy makes this point that I think about all the time. He says, imagine you showed up to work tomorrow and your boss handed you a printout. 50 prospects, all highly qualified, all ready to buy. And you're told with 90% certainty that if you just call on them within the next 24 hours, they will say yes. Guaranteed 90% close rate. What would you do? You'd be out the door before the sentence finished. You wouldn't check emails. You wouldn't chat by the coffee machine. You wouldn't second guess yourself. You wouldn't wait until after lunch. You'd call every single person on that list as fast as humanly possible. You start at dawn, work until midnight. And why? Because the fear is gone. When rejection is off the table, when the outcome is guaranteed, procrastination disappears, which proves the point. The fear of rejection is the break, not the market, not the leads, not your ability, the fear. Tracy says rejection isn't personal. It sounds simple, but most people don't actually believe it. They know it intellectually. They nod when someone says it. But in the moment, when someone says no, especially when they're rude about it, it doesn't feel impersonal. It feels like a verdict, like a judgment, like confirmation of your worst fear. But here's the reality. When someone says no, they're not rejecting you. They're rejecting the offer, the timing, the interruption. Their day is complicated. Their finances are tight. Their mind is somewhere else. 1,000 factors you can't see or control. They're not saying you're not good enough. They're saying, not this, not now, not me. Tracy compares it to weather. Some days it rains. Some days the sun shines. You don't take the rain personally. You just grab an umbrella. Same with rejection. It happens. It's part of the game. You shrug your shoulders and move on to the next. The motto is, some will, some won't. So what? Next. Now let's talk about the second fear, the fear of failure. And this one cuts even deeper because it's tied to identity. Fear of rejection says, they might not like me. Fear of rejection says, I might not be good enough. And that belief, I'm not good enough, is the most destructive thought in sales because it doesn't just stop you from acting. It stops you from trying. It stops you from believing success is even possible. Tracy says the fear of failure develops early, usually from parents who criticized too much when we were children. When you tried something new and failed, and instead of being encouraged, you were made to feel stupid or clumsy or inadequate. Your brain learned something dangerous. It learned that failure means pain. And ever since, your subconscious has been working to protect you from that pain by keeping you from trying, by keeping you from fully committing, by keeping you from putting yourself in situations where you might fail publicly. I had a conversation years ago with a rep I was coaching. Sharp guy, good instincts, solid work ethic. But his results were wildly inconsistent. Some weeks he was on fire. Other weeks he barely scraped by. I asked him one day what was going on in his head during the slow weeks. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, honestly, I start wondering if I actually belong here. Like maybe I just got lucky those good weeks. Like maybe if I really try, really put myself out there and fail, it'll prove what I've always suspected. Which is what I asked. That I'm not actually good enough. There it was. Fear of failure, dressed up as humility. He was scared that if he fully committed, if he put himself out there completely and still failed, it would confirm his deepest fear. So instead, he held back, kept some effort in reserve. That way, if things didn't work out, he could tell himself he wasn't really trying. It's the most common defense mechanism in sales, and it costs people fortunes. Tracy talks about the relationship between self-esteem and fear. He uses this image of two escalators, one going up, one going down. The up escalator leads to high self-esteem, courage, and confidence. The down escalator leads to fear, doubt, and hesitation. And here's the key. They're inverse. The more you like yourself, the faster you go up. The more you doubt yourself, the faster you slide down. They move in opposite directions. So if you want to beat the fear of failure, you don't attack the fear directly. That rarely works. Instead, you build self-esteem. You remind yourself of your wins. You acknowledge your growth. You speak to yourself the way a great coach would speak to a player. You celebrate effort, not just outcomes. And as self-esteem rises, fear loses its grips. The brakes release, and you start driving with your full foot on the gas. Here's something Tracy recommends that I've used for years. At the end of every day, write down 3 things you did well. Not closed deals, not big wins, just moments where you showed up, made the effort, handled something with skill. Maybe it was a conversation you didn't bail on. Maybe it was a callback you followed through on. Maybe it was a moment where you stayed calm when the customer was difficult. Write it down. Read it out loud. Because every time you acknowledge your own effort, every time you recognize your own progress, your self-esteem goes up. And when self-esteem goes up, the fears lose their power. You stop pulling the brake. You stop hiding behind busy work, and you start making the calls that actually matter. But here's the thing. Managing fear is one side of the equation. The other side is what you project. Because even when you've started releasing the brake, even when you've begun doing the inner work, there's still the question of what the customer actually receives. And that brings us to the transfer. The moment when your belief becomes their belief. The moment when enthusiasm stops being a feeling and becomes a force. That's what separates good salespeople from great ones. And it's what we're exploring next. There's a line from Tracy's book that I come back to again and again. A sale is a transfer of enthusiasm from one person to another. Hear that carefully. A transfer, not a performance, not a presentation, not a demonstration of features or an explanation of benefits, a transfer. You're not convincing someone with logic. You're giving them something you already have, something they can feel, something that moves from your chest into theirs. And if you don't have it, if the enthusiasm isn't there, there's nothing to transfer. You're just making noise. Think about the last time you bought something you didn't plan to buy. A car, a piece of clothing, a gym membership, a service you weren't even looking for. Chances are the salesperson didn't convince you with facts. They didn't win you over with a spreadsheet of features. They infected you with their energy. They believed so deeply in what they were offering, felt it so completely, that you started believing it too. Their enthusiasm became your enthusiasm. Their certainty became your certainty. That's what selling actually is. Not pushing, not convincing, radiating. When you're lit up, people lean in. When you're flat, they walk away. I learned this lesson on a Movati Athletics sales floor. I was 20 years old, still new enough to be hungry, still green enough to not know all the tricks. But something about that environment, that energy, the culture, the belief that what we were doing actually helped people made every conversation feel alive. I remember one afternoon in particular, a guy walked in to ask about training packages. He'd been dragging his wife here for weeks, finally came in to talk. But his body language was closed, arms crossed, leaning back, expression that said, "Sell me if you can." Classic skeptic. And instead of retreating, instead of tightening up and going into convince mode, I felt something rise in my chest. This excitement, this certainty, because I knew, genuinely knew, that if this guy committed and followed through, his life was going to change. And I'd seen it happen 100 times. Guys who walked in skeptical, who didn't believe they could transform, who thought it was too late for them, and 6 months later looked like different people, felt like different people, were different people. And I didn't hide that feeling. I let it come through. I talked about what training had done for me, for people I'd worked with. I painted a picture of what his life could look like, not with hype, not with pressure, with conviction. And somewhere in the middle of it, his arms uncrossed, his posture softened, his questions changed from challenges to curiosity. By the end, he didn't need convincing. He felt what I felt. That's the transfer. And here's the thing, though. You can't manufacture enthusiasm. You can fake it for a minute, maybe a conversation, maybe even a day. But over time, the mask slips. The act wears thin. Your real energy shows through. And if you don't genuinely love what you sell, if you don't deeply believe it helps people, the transfer never happens. The customer feels the emptiness. They feel the performance, and they don't trust it. So if your enthusiasm has been running low lately, if you've been going through the motions, if the fire has dimmed, the answer isn't to try harder to fake it. The answer is to reconnect with why you do this, to go back to the source, to remember why you got into this work in the first place. And if you can't remember, if it's been so long that you've forgotten, that's the work. Not a script, not a new technique, reconnection. Tracy says the best salespeople love their product and love selling. Not just like, love. They genuinely are excited to talk about what they offer. They feel that helping someone buy is one of the most important things they can do. And that energy, that love, creates an emotional field that customers walks into. Before a word is spoken, the feeling is already in the room. I remember a conversation I had with a fundraiser I was coaching. She was on my team in New Zealand. Solid numbers, good work ethic, but something felt off, like she was running at 70%. I asked her, "Do you love what you're selling?" She hesitated. "I like it. I believe in the cause. But love? That feels like a strong word." So I told her a story. There was a donor she signed up months earlier. Older woman, living on a pension, didn't have much. But she wanted to give, wanted to feel like she was making a difference. A few months later, the donor called the charity office. She'd received a letter from the child she was sponsoring, a little girl in Africa. The letter talked about going to a school for the first time and learning to read, about dreaming of becoming a teacher one day. The donor cried on the phone. She said it was the best money she'd ever spent. Said it made her feel like her life mattered. I asked my fundraiser, "What part of that story don't you love?" She went quiet. And then I saw it. The shift. The spark coming back. She wasn't just selling a product. She was connecting people to something meaningful. She was giving donors the chance to feel their lives mattered. She was changing the story of children halfway around the world. That's not a transaction. That's a transformation. She walked out of that conversation different. Her numbers climbed the rest of the month. Not because she learned a new technique, because she remembered why she was doing it. Enthusiasm isn't hype. Let me be clear about that. I'm not talking about being loud. I'm not talking about being aggressive. I'm not talking about bouncing off the walls energy. Enthusiasm, in its truest sense, is conviction made visible. It's the natural overflow of actually believing in what you do. It's calm, it's grounded, it's real. And when you have it, you don't have to push. People feel pulled towards you. They want what you have. They want to feel what you feel. Tracy says emotions are contagious. When you're positive, confident, enthusiastic, the customer picks it up. Not consciously, at an unconscious level. Their nervous system reads yours, and they start to feel what you feel. That's why the best time to make a sale is right after you've made a sale. Your self-esteem is high, your confidence is peaked, your enthusiasm is overflowing, and the next customer walks into that field. They feel it, they trust it, they buy. Here's the takeaway. Before your next sales day, do something that reconnects you to the meaning behind what you sell. Read a testimonial from someone whose life's changed. Remember a customer who thanked you. Think about the problem your product actually solves. Remind yourself why this matters. You're not just making a living, you're making a difference. And when you feel that again, when the conviction is restored, the enthusiasm will follow. And when the enthusiasm is real, the transfer takes care of itself. But enthusiasm alone isn't enough, because even with conviction, even with energy, you're still operating in a competitive field. There are other salespeople, other options, other choices the customer could make. So the question becomes, what separates the top performers from everyone else? What gives them the edge? And the answer is smaller than you think. That's the winning edge. And it explains why some people earn 10 times more than others while barely working harder. So let's go there. Here's a concept that changed the way I think about competition and about what it actually takes to succeed. Tracy calls it the winning edge, and the principle is deceptively simple. Small differences in ability lead to enormous differences in result. Read that again. Small differences, enormous results. Not proportional, not linear, exponential. Think about horse racing. A horse wins by a nose, just a nose. The barest margin imaginable, but it earns 10 times the prize money of the horse that finished second. 10 times. Was it 10 times faster? No. Was it even 10% faster? No. It was a nose faster, a fraction of a second, a difference so small you could barely measure it. But in a winner-take-all game, that tiny margin translates into massive rewards. Sales works the same way. When a prospect chooses one salesperson over another, they're not choosing based on who's dramatically better. They're not running a detailed analysis of who has superior features or pricing. They're choosing based on who felt slightly more trustworthy, slightly more confident, slightly more helpful, slightly more aligned with what they need. And that's the small edge. That's the tiny advantage. Translates into all the money. The salesperson who wins gets the commission. The one who loses gets nothing. Not half, not a percent, nothing. Winner takes all. Here's why this matters. If success requires being 10 times better than everyone else, most people would give up. It would feel impossible. Who has time to become 10 times better at anything? But if success requires being just 3 or 4% better in that area that matters most, that's achievable. That's something anyone can work on. That's within reach. Tracy identifies what he calls the key result area of selling. These are the core skills that determine your success. There are 7 of them. There's prospecting, building rapport, identifying needs, presenting, answering objections, closing, getting referrals, and repeat business. He compares them to the digits in a phone number. You have to dial each one correctly, in sequence, to make the connection. Miss one digit, even one, and the call doesn't go through. Doesn't matter how many other digits you get right, the call fails. Sales works the same way. If you're strong in 6 areas, but weak in one, the weakness breaks the chain. It doesn't matter how good your presentation is. If you can't close, it doesn't matter how well you handle objections if you never prospect. Each skill is a link, and the chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So here's the real question. Which of those 7 areas is holding you back? Be honest with yourself, not defensive, honest. Are you great at rapport, but weak at closing? Strong at presenting, but avoiding prospecting? Good at identifying needs, but soft at asking for the sale? Most salespeople know somewhere deep down where their gap is. They just don't want to look at it because looking at it means admitting something needs work. And that's uncomfortable. But here's the insight that changed my approach. The moment you identify your weak area, you have the winning edge in sight because you can improve it. And improving it, even slightly, changes everything. I think back to a guy I coached when I was running my team. He was solid at almost everything. Great energy, strong presentation. People liked him immediately, but his closing was soft. He'd get to the end of a conversation, the moment when the sale either happens or slips away, and instead of asking clearly for the commitment, he'd trail off. So what do you think? Does that sound like something you'd be interested in? Want to take some time to think about it? Vague, passive, weak. And because of that one gap, he was leaving deals on the table. People who wanted to say yes were being given permission to say, let me think about it. And once they left, they never came back. He spent a few weeks focused on one thing, closing. Not the entire game, just the close. We practiced different asks, rehearsed the exact words he'd use at the end of a presentation, made him say them out loud until they felt natural. Based on everything we've talked about, I think the family plan is the perfect fit for you. Should we get you started today? Clear, direct, confident. He felt awkward at first, thought it sounded pushy, but we kept refining until it felt like an extension of his personality, not a performance. Until the close wasn't an imposition, it was simply the next step. Within a month, his numbers jumped. Not doubled, but up 20-30%. Not because he changed everything, because he fixed one thing. That's the winning edge. Here's another piece of this. The people at the top didn't start there. Tracy makes this point repeatedly. Everyone who is now in the top 10% started somewhere in the bottom. They weren't born with superior skills. They weren't given advantages others didn't have. They identified what was holding them back and they worked on it. They treated every weak skill as a project, every gap as an opportunity. And over time, those small improvements stacked up, compounded until they pulled ahead. Tracy cites research showing that the average top performer earns 16 times what the average bottom performer earns. 16 times. Not because they work 16 times harder, not because they're 16 times smarter, but because their small advantages compounded across years create massive results. They win by a nose again and again, and those noses add up. You're not starting from scratch. That's the empowering part of this. You already have most of the pieces. You're already competent in most areas. You just need to find the one or two things that are costing you and fix them. That's all. Because 3% better at prospecting, 4% better at closing, 5% better at handling the objections that keep tripping you up, and watch what happens. Here's what I want you to do this week. Pick just one key result area that you know is weak. Just one. Maybe it's prospecting. Maybe it's presenting. Maybe it's asking for the close. Maybe it's following up for referrals. Whatever it is, the one thing you've been avoiding, focus on it. Read about it. Watch videos on it. Practice it. Role play it. Get feedback. Don't try to fix everything at once. That's overwhelming. Just become 3 or 4% better in that one area and watch what shifts. Because when you build the winning edge, even by a nose, the results don't increase proportionally. They multiply. But here's the deeper question. How do you know what to work on? How do you know which skill will actually make the difference? The answer isn't guessing. It's studying what the best are doing, reverse engineering their success, understanding that success isn't random, it's predictable, that the law of cause and effect, and it's the most liberating idea in all of selling. I want to talk about something that might seem obvious at first, but most salespeople live as if they've never heard it. Success is not an accident. Failure is not an accident. Both have causes, specific, identifiable, reproducible causes. Tracy calls this the law of cause and effect. And understanding it, really understanding it, changes everything. Here's how most people think about success. They look at the top performers in their company, the ones consistently at the top of the leaderboard, the ones earning 3, 4, 5 times what everyone else earns. And they assume luck. Right place, right time, right territory, better leads, natural charisma, some gifts they were born with. And because they believe success is random, because they think the top performers just got dealt a better hand, they don't study it. They don't ask what those people are actually doing. They just shrug their shoulders and hope that one day the dice will roll in their favor. That thinking keeps people stuck for years, sometimes for entire careers. The law of cause and effect says something different. It says that success leaves tracks, that if you do what successful people do consistently and repeatedly, you will eventually get the same results. Not immediately, not magically, but inevitably. The top performers in your field aren't doing something mysterious. They're doing specific things, thinking specific thoughts, making specific choices, having specific conversations. And if you study those patterns and apply them, if you reverse engineer what's working, you will rise. Tracy tells his own story of learning this the hard way. When he started in sales, he had nothing, no training, no background, no education. Someone handed him a stack of brochures and pointed at the door. Here's your cards. Here's your material. Go sell. That was entire training. So he did what he thought you were supposed to do. He worked hard, brutally hard, from before dawn, cold calling, late at night, knocking on doors, making pitches, running from prospect to prospect. And for 6 months, he barely scraped by. Made just enough to pay rent on a tiny room, ate cheap food, wandered constantly. If he was cut out for this. Then one day, he did something that changed everything. He asked. He looked at the top salesperson in his office, a guy who was selling 5, 10 times as much as anyone else. And he asked him what he was doing differently. The guy barely seemed to work, rolled in around 9, had a few conversations, made a few calls, went to lunch. Yet he was crushing everyone. What was his secret? Turns out, he worked for a Fortune 500 company years earlier. They'd put him through 16 months of intensive sales training, real training. Not here's your card, there's the door. Structured, professional, comprehensive training. He'd learned a system, a method, a way of asking questions and guiding conversations that led naturally to the sale. And once Tracy saw it, once he understood what the cause actually was, everything shifted. He wrote down everything the top performer told him, started applying it immediately, and his results went up. Then he started studying, reading books, listening to audio programs, attending seminars. He realized that selling wasn't a gift, it was a skill, and skills can be learned. His results kept climbing. Here's the insight that hit me. When I first heard this story, your current results are not random. If you're stuck, there's a reason. If you've plateaued, something is causing it. And that might be uncomfortable to admit because it means you can't blame the market. You can't blame the leads. You can't blame the economy. The cause is somewhere in your approach, in your mindset, in your skills, in your daily habits. But here's why that's actually liberating. If the cause is internal, the solution is too. You're not at the mercy of forces outside of your control. You're at the mercy of your own choices. and you can change those. Every time I've plateaued in my career, and I've plateaued more than once, there was always a cause. Sometimes it was mindset. I'd gotten comfortable, lost the edge, stopped pushing. Sometimes it was a skill gap. Sometimes I thought I knew, but I actually didn't. Something I was avoiding because it was hard. Sometimes it was how I was spending my time, focusing on low value activities, avoiding the uncomfortable work. But once I found the cause and addressed it, the plateau broke. It wasn't magic. It wasn't luck. It was math. Change the input, change the output. When I was building my fundraising team in New Zealand, I noticed something. The reps who improved fastest were the ones who asked the most questions. They weren't embarrassed to say, I don't know how to do that. Show me. They watched the top performers closely. They asked what scripts they were using, what they said when someone objected, how they handled difficult moments. They were students, always learning, always studying. And then they went out and practiced, applied what they learned, tested it in the field. The ones who stayed stuck were the ones who assumed the top performers were just naturals. They didn't study the cause, so they never got the effect. Here's the lesson. If someone else in your industry selling the same product to the same market under the same conditions is earning 3 or 4 times what you earn, that's proof. Proof that it's possible. Proof that the skills exist. Proof that the results are achievable. Your only job is to find out what they're doing and do it yourself. This isn't about copying blindly. It's about recognizing that success has a structure, that there are principles underneath the performance, patterns underneath the results. And once you learn those principles, you can adapt them, make them your own, apply them in your way with your personality in your market. But start with the cause, not hoping, not wishing, studying. Here's what I want you to do. Find someone in your industry, maybe in your own company, who's performing at the level you want to reach. Reach out. Ask if you can buy them lunch. Ask them what they do differently, what they focus on, what habits they've built, what mistakes they've made that you can skip. Most top performers will share. They remember being where you are. They remember struggling. And most of them are generous with what they've learned. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just have to find someone who's already built one and ask how they did it. That's the law of cause and effect in action. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. But here's the final piece. Knowing what to do isn't enough. Studying success isn't enough. At some point, you have to commit, really commit, not halfway, not when it's convenient, fully. And that means paying the price of success. That's where we're headed next. Because everything we've talked about, the inner game, the thermostat, the fear, the transfer, the winning edge, the law of cause and effect, it all comes down to this. Will you do the work? Let's talk about what that actually means. Everything we've talked about today leads here. Again, the inner game, the invisible sale, the thermostat, the fear, the transfers, the winning edge, the law of cause and effect. All of it is meaningless if you're not willing to do the work. Tracy is blunt about this, more blunt than most authors. He doesn't sugarcoat it. He doesn't promise shortcuts. He says it plainly. Success requires effort, sustained, focused, often uncomfortable effort. There is no hack. There is no trick. There is no secret workaround that lets you skip the hard part. The people who make it to the top understand this before they start climbing. The ones who don't, wash out. He uses an analogy that I've never forgotten. Think about an airplane on a runway. It's loaded with passengers, full of fuel, ready to go. To get off the ground, to lift into the sky, it has to reach takeoff speed. And to reach takeoff speed, the pilot must apply full throttle, 100% maximum effort, everything the engine has. If the pilot gives 80%, even 90%, The plane stays on the ground. It never reaches takeoff speed. It rolls down the runway, running out of asphalt, and eventually crashes. There is no cruising at 80% before you lift off. You can't coast into the sky. It's full throttle or nothing. That's how sales careers work. The beginning is the hardest. You're building skills you don't have yet. You're making mistakes you haven't learned from yet. You're pushing through rejection and uncertainty and fear. You're earning less than you want while working more than you expected. And it's tempting to pull back, to coast, to give 80% because that feels sustainable. To tell yourself you'll push harder when things get better. But 80% keeps you on the ground. It keeps you in the bottom 80% of earners. It keeps you stuck at the same level year after year, wondering why the breakthroughs never come. The people who break through are the ones who go all in, who give 100%, not forever, but long enough to reach cruising altitude, who start earlier, stay later, use every hour as an opportunity to improve, who treat this season like it matters, because it does. I learned this the hard way when I was young. Back at Movati, I was doing well, good numbers, solid reputation, but I wasn't doing great. And I knew exactly why. I was comfortable. I'd show up on time, not early, just on time. I'd do a decent job, not exceptional, just decent. I'd leave when my shift ended, not late, not ever. I was giving 80%, maybe 85, and my results reflected it. Then I watched someone who was giving 100%. He was there before the gym opened, reviewing notes, practicing his pitch in the mirror. He was making calls while everyone else was taking breaks. He was staying late to follow up, to debrief, to get better. He was reading books on selling while everyone else watching TV. And his numbers were absurd, consistently at the top, making more in a month than most people made in a quarter. I remember looking at him and thinking, he's just more talented. But it wasn't talent. I watched him closely enough to know. It was effort. Consistent, focused, uncomfortable effort. He was paying the price and I wasn't. Once I saw that, once I really understood it, I made a decision. I started arriving earlier, started staying later. I started treating every conversation as practice, every objection as a learning opportunity, every day as a chance to get better. I started studying, really studying what worked and what didn't, not just going through the motions, paying attention. And within a few months, my numbers caught up, not because I became more talented, because I finally paid the price. Here's what most people don't understand. The price of success is paid in advance. You don't get to wait until the results come in and then decide to work hard. You don't get to see the first commission check and then put in the effort. It doesn't work that way. You pay first. You invest the effort before you see the return. You make the sacrifice before you feel the reward. It's not fair. It's not how we designed it if we could, but it's how it works. Tracy makes the point that the highest earners in sales are not grinding themselves into dust forever. Once they've reached a certain level of skill and reputation, the game gets easier. Referrals start flowing in. Repeat business builds. Their reputation precedes them. Customers come to them instead of the other way around. The effort per dollar decreases, but that only happens because they put in the full effort at the beginning. They hit full throttle when it mattered. They got off the runway. They reached cruising altitude, and now they can ease off a little. But that ease came after the hard part, not instead of it. The question you have to ask yourself is this: am I really giving 100%? Or am I giving 80 and hoping for a 100% result? Be honest. Because if you're being honest, the answer might explain a lot about your current situation. I remember coaching a young fundraiser who was struggling, working hard, or so she said, but not seeing results. I asked her to walk me through a typical day. She showed up at 10. The site opened at 9. She took lunch at noon, a full hour. She finished her last conversation at 4. The site stayed open till 6. She was working all day, but she was working maybe 4 hours of real focus selling. The rest was transition, travel, breaks, warm up, wind down. I didn't criticize her. I just showed her the math. You're working 4 hours. The top performers are working 8. You're not twice as talented. They're doing twice the work. That's the gap. She got it. She changed. Her numbers turned around in weeks. Here's the challenge. For the next 30 days, commit to full throttle. Not forever, just 30 days. Start earlier. Work smarter. Use every available minute. Study when you could scroll. Practice when you could relax. Reach out when you could wait. Fill the time with activity that actually matters. You don't have to do this for the rest of your career, just long enough to break through, just long enough to reach cruising altitude. And once you're there, once the skills are sharp, the habits are formed, the reputation is built, you can ease off a little. But that moment only comes after you pay the price, not before. This is the uncomfortable truth about success. It's not random. It's not gifted. It's not reserved for the lucky few. It's earned. One day at a time, one call at a time, 100% effort applied consistently over time. The people who earn it are the ones who decide right now, not someday, that they're willing to pay what it costs. So the question is simple. Are you? We've covered a lot of ground today. 7 lessons, 7 shifts, 7 pieces of inner game that, when combined, create a foundation strong enough to hold any level of success. But information without action is just entertainment. So before we close, I want to give you something practical, something you can take with you, a toolkit you can use starting today to put these ideas into practice. Let's walk through it. All right. So we've covered a lot of ground today. 7 lessons, each one building on the last. Each one designed to strengthen the foundation that holds your entire sales career. Now, before we close, I want to give you something you can take with you. Not just ideas, tools, practical, actionable things you can do before the next call, your next meeting, your next door. You can download the full toolkit document by clicking on the link in the description below, but let me walk you through the highlights right now. The first tool, and really the foundation of everything else, is learning to make the invisible sale first. Before you try to transfer belief to a customer, you have to own it yourself. So before every sales day, before you pick up the phone, before you walk into the meeting, before you knock on the door, ask yourself one question. Why does this matter? Not the surface answer, the real answer, the one that connects to the purpose, to the impact, to the difference this work makes in the people's lives. If you can't feel that answer in your chest, not just thinking it, feel it, don't start selling it. Reconnect first, then sell. And once you've made that invisible sale, once you've reconnected with why this matters, there's a deeper layer to address. Because belief in the moment isn't enough if your subconscious is working against you. Which brings us to the second tool, resetting your thermostat. Your income isn't limited by the market. It's limited by your self-concept. And self-concept can be changed. Here's the practice. Write down the income you want to earn, not a fantasy, the next level up, something that stretches you but feels possible. Then write this sentence underneath it. I am the kind of person who earns this amount of money. This is who I am now. Read it every morning, every night, before every sales call. Your subconscious doesn't know the difference between what's real and what's vividly imagined. Feel it, a new picture, and watch your behavior start to match. But here's the thing about resetting the thermostat. Even with a new identity taking shape, there's still something holding most salespeople back. A force that limits action before you even realize it's happening. So the third tool you'll need is the ability to release the brake. Fear of rejection and fear of failure are running in your background, slowing you down. You can't eliminate them completely, but you can reframe them. Rejection isn't personal. It's not a verdict of your worth. It's weather. Some days it rains. You bring an umbrella and you keep moving. The motto is, some will, some won't. So what? Next. Tape that to your mirror. Say it before every call and watch the brake start to release. And once the brake is off, once you're actually showing up and having conversations, the question becomes, what are you bringing into those conversations? Because activity without energy is just noise, which is why the fourth tool might be the most important one for you to carry into every interaction: the ability to transfer enthusiasm. You can't give what you don't have. If your enthusiasm has dimmed, if you've been going through the motions, the answer isn't a new script. It's reconnection. Connect to why you love what you sell. Read a testimonial. Remember a customer whose life's changed. Think about the problem your product actually solves. Find the meaning underneath the transaction and let that energy show up in your voice, your posture, your presence. The transfer happens automatically when the enthusiasm is real. But even with real enthusiasm, you're still competing. There are other salespeople out there, other options. So how do you pull ahead? Not by being dramatically better, but by being strategically better. And that's where the fifth tool comes in: building your winning edge. Success doesn't require being 10 times better. It requires being 3 or 4% better in the areas that matter. Identify your weakest key result area: prospecting, rapport, presenting, closing, referrals. Pick one. Focus on it this week. Read about it, practice it, get feedback, because just a little bit better and watch the results multiply. Of course, knowing what to improve is only half the equation. The other half is knowing how. And that's why the sixth tool is so powerful: learning to study success. Success leaves tracks. If someone else is doing what you want to do, earning what you want to earn, there's a reason. Find them, ask them, study them. What are they doing that you're not? What do they focus on? What mistakes did they make that you can skip? You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just have to find someone who built one and learn how they did it. And finally, after all the mindset work, the skill building, the studying, there's one thing that ties it all together. The one thing that separates people who know what to do from the people who actually do it. The seventh tool, and maybe the hardest one to master: being willing to pay the price. Full throttle, 100%, not forever, but long enough to break through. For the next 30 days, commit fully. Start earlier, stay later, use every hour. Fill the time with activity that matters. The breakthrough is waiting on the other side of effort, but you have to give everything before you see the return. That's the price, and it's non-negotiable. So here's where we land. This episode started with a question: do you really believe in what you sell? And by now, I hope you see the answer has less to do with the product and everything to do with you, your self-concept, your beliefs, your inner game. The customer doesn't hear your pitch. They feel your certainty. They mirror your energy. They decide not based on logic, not based on features, not based on price, but on whether they trust the person in front of them. And trust comes from conviction. Conviction comes from self-belief. Self-belief comes from doing the work, internal and external, to become the kind of person whose certainty can't be shaken. Brian Tracy wrote this book because he discovered something that changed his life. Success in sales is not an accident. It's not a gift given to the lucky few. It's learnable. It's predictable. It's available to anyone willing to understand the principles and apply them. He went from cold calling in desperation, barely paying rent, sleeping in a tiny room, to becoming one of the most successful sales trainers in the world. Not because he was born with something others don't have, because he studied, because he learned, because he applied. And you can do the same. You're not broken. You're not behind. You're not missing some secret gene that makes success possible. You're just in the process of becoming. And the person you're becoming, the one who believes without wavering, who shows up without excuse, who transfers enthusiasm without faking it, that person is closer than you think. One thought at a time, one affirmation at a time, one fear faced, one skill improved, one day of full effort. That's how it happens. Not overnight, not all at once, but inevitably, predictably, if you do the work. Tracy dedicated this book to the salespeople who bravely go where no one has gone before. He calls us the heroes and the heroines of free enterprise. And I believe that. Not because we chase commission, not because we love the hustle, not because we face rejection every single day and keep going, because we ask for trust before we've fully earned it. Because we put ourselves on the line again and again, knowing the answer might be no. That takes courage. That takes resilience. That takes something most people don't have. And if you are still listening right now, if you stayed with me this far, you have it. So here's my ask. Take one thing from today's episode, just one, and apply it this week. Maybe it's the invisible sale. Every morning, reconnecting with why this matters. Maybe it's the thermostat, writing out the new income identity and reading it daily. Maybe it's building the winning edge, picking one skill area and focusing on it for the next 30 days. Maybe it's finding a mentor, someone ahead of you who can show you the path. Pick one, do it, and watch what shifts. If this episode meant something to you, if it gave you something you'll actually use, I want to ask you two things. First, subscribe. This is just the beginning. We're going to go deeper. We're going to explore more books, more frameworks, more psychology. We're going to interview experts. We're going to look at how AI is changing sales. We're going to build something here, a community of salespeople committed to evolution. And I don't want you to miss any of it. So subscribe now, wherever you're listening. But second, share this. If you know a teammate, a friend, a colleague who's struggling, someone who needs to hear this, send it to them. This message is meant to spread. These ideas can change careers, and you can be the one who delivers them. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring enough about your craft to invest this time. This was episode 1, the foundation, the inner game, and there's so much more to come. I'll see you in the next episode. Until then, keep evolving. This has been the Sales Evolution Lab podcast, exploring the science of selling from past wisdom to future innovation. I'm Kyle Mackie, and I'll talk to you soon.